Roesiger Community and Boat Club president start to kick it off. And I want to just let everybody know from the beginning that this meeting will be recorded. So if you're uncomfortable with that or want to have your video off, now would be the time to do that because we are starting recording. So thank you. And Brian.
All right, good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Brian Reber, and I'm the current Lake Roesiger Community and Boat Club president. And I would like to welcome everybody to this meeting and thank you for doing the survey and attending this meeting also. I want to thank the county, which is Marissa and Jennifer, and the Lake Roesiger Steering Committee and Tetra Tech for their efforts in putting the Integrated Aquatic Vegetation Management Plan, the IAVMP, option together for the community. Basically, back in 2017, the county stopped funding removal of milfoil. The club and its members took on and funded the effort to remove and control the spread of milfoil. In addition, the club created a committee that would look into the options that would address invasive plants. The IMVP grant to develop a plan was an option, which brings us to where we are today. With that, I will turn this over to Marissa. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate the introduction. So again, my name is Marissa Bergdorf. I am with Snohomish County Surface Water Management. We're a part of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And I am joined here tonight by Jennifer Oden, who is the technical person running the Zoom meeting tonight. She is also, we're both with our lake management program at Snohomish County. And we're going to be hearing first from our consultants that helped to put together the plan. And that is, there's three of us on here tonight, three of our consultants. The first is Dr. Tony Pennington. She'll be starting off and giving a plan overview. And we have Dr. Harry Gibbons from Tetra Tech Inc. and Shannon Bradabo from Tetra Tech. And Shannon will be our timekeeper tonight, so she's going to keep us on track. So you may see her interrupting us. But collectively, this group team brings nearly 100 years of lake management experience collectively together. Harry Gibbons has worked for almost 50 years on lake management, including programs at Lake Roesiger. He helped to develop the phase 1 lake study on the lake water quality, as well as helped work at the forest planning. There was a lawsuit there in that area. For those of you that have been around a long time might remember that. And Tony has worked all over the West on invasive aquatic plant control, management plans, implementing those, and brings a lot. So without further ado, I'm going to have Tony take it over to get us started.
Thanks, Marissa. I wanted to extend thank you also again to the steering committee and the boat club, the club board, also to the county for inviting the Tetra Tech ESA team to work on this project. So a lengthy list of folks here to thank, so appreciate that. A lot of you, I noticed there were 200 views on the site for the recorded video. I don't know how many people have watched it twice or left it running and ran errands, but this is an attempt to give a very brief recap of that. I believe that presentation was on the order of about 45 minutes, and that was not just with me going over the plan, but with Marissa's contribution as well. And so if there are some lingering questions that don't get addressed here, then you might re-review either the executive summary from the plan or revisit those pre-recorded slides. I want to start by again going over some of the benefits of aquatic plants. We're all here because mostly you want to get rid of some plants, but I think it's really important to also point out that the aquatic plants in general, they are a natural component of an aquatic and healthy ecosystem. They act as a nursery and provide cover for fish. They also help protect water quality, and they provide habitat for a number of aquatic species, also birds and turtles. And with native plants, these typically tend to have some natural controls. So we don't see, typically anyway, we don't see an overabundance of a native aquatic plant. Conversely, with invasive aquatic plants, they do tend to grow in just near monocultures and cause nuisance condition. The photo on the left is taken underwater of Eurasian watermilfoil. These tend to grow again in monotypic stands. They displace other native plants and are detrimental or harmful to the local ecology. They also tend to be very adaptable and prolific and have, as opposed to a native aquatic plant, have few natural enemies. And sadly, they are very difficult to control, both in cost and in available methods. So kind of comparing a diverse native plant community on the left to a more monospecific stand of non-native plants on the right can look a little bit like this, where in the diverse stand, the aquatic organisms tend to take advantage of varying structure in the water column and allows for greater species diversity. Whereas in invasive plant stands, the fish tend to use the edges of the stand or any channels through the stand, but these dense stands tend to disrupt mixing of the water column, so you get differences in dissolved oxygen and pH that fish might avoid using. So Marissa and Jen did a very detailed survey of the lake this year and found a number of beneficial submersed and emergent plant species. I won't go into the full list, but I will point out that the maps and very detailed information that you can drill down into is on the project website. I encourage you to look at that if you want to get a better sense for where both native and non-native plants were found. So this is kind of an overview of some of the beneficial native plants. And then there are a number of shoreline species. I know that there's definitely some invasive shoreline species, but you have to, you know, there are also some very beneficial, like the rushes and the hardback or the spirea, marsh sinkfold, and sluice sedge. Unfortunately, they also found a number of, well, two in particular, submersed invasive aquatic plants. The first being Slender Arrowhead, and the other, which is probably more common to most people, is Eurasian watermilfoil. I think it's probably pretty, I think most people know that the Slender Arrowhead is a bit unique in your lake because it's only found in 5 locations in Washington. So there's a lot of attention on preventing the spread of Slender Arrowhead here on the left to other lakes in Washington. Eurasian watermilfoil is of course very widespread, but you guys are in a unique position where while it's widespread across the state of Washington, it's not that dense in your lake. And there's already been a number of efforts, as Brian mentioned, to control this plant. Some of the shoreline invasives that we'll touch on, I'm not going to get into the details of these, but invasive knotweed, purple loosestrife, obviously very showy and attractive flower, but highly invasive. And another attractive showy one, yellow flag iris. And lastly, another emergent or floating leafed invasive is the ever-loved fragrant water lily. Not to be confused with the native spatterdock that you might want to compare when you have a moment to just do a quick Google search to see the differences between those. So this is just an example of the findings from Snohomish County's survey this summer. You can get a sense for the widespread distribution of the yellow flag iris here in the middle basin and the isolated pockets of Japanese knotweed and purple loosestrife. But I just encourage you to go to the website for now. We drilled into this a little bit more in the recorded presentation. So some of the control, before I drill into this, I want to emphasize that when developing these aquatic vegetation management plans, ecology has guidance that requires us to look at a full suite of control methods. We did do that. We discussed that in the last presentation. It's included in the plan. But what I'm going to talk about here are just the ones that we've landed on for further discussion and consideration. And I'm going to talk about them in 2 separate sets. One is more of the small scale, like what can you do, versus a larger scale, and you're going to have to hire someone to help do this work. So on a smaller scale, there's simple hand removal of small patches. This is something a landowner can do yourself, or you can hire a diver. Without diving, we would say this is pretty minimal cost. You're getting in the water and just reaching in and pulling out plants. The downside is that it's really limited to fairly small infestations, and of course it's limited to the depth, unless you're willing to snorkel or again hire a diver. There are a number of cutting or raking devices that you can purchase online, and these can be used to cut plants from the shore or a dock. No matter what, we're really encouraging people to cut the flowers and seeds from a lot of these shoreline plants. That can really, it won't maybe get rid of the plant, but it will protect it from spreading. I will say really quickly though, with yellow flag iris, you do need to wear protective gloves because the resin from the plants can be harmful to your skin. So be mindful of that. But that's one of the things that in kind of an education outreach component, we would, include that type of information. But anyway, cutting and raking, it's low equipment costs. A lot of these rakes, you can make something from your house or the hardware store. You don't have to buy these things that are developed just for aquatic plants. But again, it's just really better for small infestations, and you have to be mindful that all the plant material is removed so that you don't have fragments floating around and growing in someone else's dock area. And there's also barriers. Different types of material are available. We typically advocate for burlap because it will break down over time. It's effective for very small patches, maybe in your docks. Moderate cost, but the downside is, as any of you know who've tried these, they do require quite a bit of maintenance because sediment can build up on top of the barrier, and you can actually get plants growing on top of that. This does require a permit or at least a hydraulic project approval from WDFW, and the barriers do have to be removed after a couple of years unless you get permission from them. So on the larger scale, starting really big, we did look at hydraulic dredging, which essentially sucks plants and muck from the bottom of the lake bed. So you get the added benefit of the removal of both the nuisance plant and some of the muck. And we calculated that we might be able to increase the channel depth by roughly 3 feet using this approach. The downside is it is extraordinarily expensive, as you'll see. And you do need a fairly large upland area for dewatering the sediment before it can be transported off-site. Any submerged objects like docks and logs definitely can inhibit where hydraulic dredging can be used, and there are painful permitting issues that might constrain the use of this in any water body. Harvesters, there's a number of mechanical contraptions, I like to call them, that can sort of mow plants out, and the idea is you mow them out and then remove them. This maybe isn't the best picture because it doesn't look like this particular device has a way of capturing the plants on there and then offloading it to get them out of the water. But the benefit of a harvester is you can use it to clear channels, which is desirable for some folks, especially in a situation where you might have wall-to-wall milfoil and you just want to create boat lanes. But speaking of milfoil, in your particular situation, I wouldn't recommend using a harvester in an area where there is milfoil that hasn't first been removed. Otherwise, you're going to chop those up. Even the best situation of harvesting and removing the plants, there's still going to be fragments, as you can imagine. One of the unknowns with harvesting in the area that you're in is with the availability of equipment. These contraptions can cost an order from like 60,000 to 125,000, somewhere in that ballpark. So it's not something you just, can find readily. There's got to be a big incentive for people to purchase the equipment, transport it, maintain it, operate it. So, and like hydraulic dredging, there's an issue of obstacles and also shallow water. And it requires a frequent operation similar to mowing. Some of the other larger scale, which is actually already, as you probably know, happening in the lake, is diver-assisted suction harvesting, or DASH, which basically a diver is down at the bottom of the lake, pulls the vegetation out, and it's pulled up by suction to the top of the boat, where a tender can separate plants and clean things out and bag it and get ready for off-site disposal. The good things about DASH is it does typically remove the entire plant and its roots if you have a really dedicated operator. It can be species specific, and eradication may even be possible with small infestations. But there is a relatively high cost, and it's fairly slow. You can imagine it'd be like vacuuming up plants at the bottom of the lake. So there is that, and also availability of contractors is a bit limited. And one of the other, lastly, large-scale control methods is the use of ecology-approved aquatic herbicides. So these chemicals are applied directly to the water or plants, in the case of an emergent plant, to directly inhibit the plant growth. Again, these are ecology approved, EPA approved. In fact, ecology is a bit more conservative about its view of how their approvals work, and it's a process that they go through about every 5 years to review what is approved. So they're probably one of the most conservative states next to maybe California. Herbicides are very cost effective and they provide a high level of control. Not that you're not still going to get a one season 100% control, but relatively speaking, it's very cost effective. There is a potential to damage non-target plants, and a permit is required for the application of aquatic herbicides, and it can only be applied by a licensed applicator. So as part of the plan, we, based on the number of target, or based on the target species in the lake, there, we ran down the list of potential products that could target those plants. So it's interesting because there are roughly 300 herbicides that are approved for use in the United States, but only 16 of those, I'm sorry, I didn't make the dot go away. I don't know how to make that stop. Sorry about that. Only 16 are currently registered for aquatic use, and about 8 of those are labeled for use on the target plants in Lake Roesiger. And so the plant, or the products that are listed here are the ones that we evaluated for the target plants, but the ones in red are the ones that we landed on for particular use on those target plants. And I want to point out that with these 2 particular products, Amazamox and Amazapure, it's not uncommon to add an adjuvant to the tank mix. And the short description of an adjuvant is it enhances the herbicidal activity. So it ensures that the product stays in contact with the plant or penetrates the leaf. It sort of depends on what plant you're talking about, and how it's applied determines which adjuvant is used. But more importantly, ecology in the permit, the permit that you apply for doing an aquatic herbicide application, specifically lists adjuvants that they've approved. And further, Washington Department of Ag has done an evaluation of a number of these products, and they've come up with a list which they refer to as practically non-toxic. So part of our recommendations would obviously you can only use the ones on ecology list, but further only use the ones that have been reviewed by Department of Ag. So how were these selected? Obviously they have to be in part based on the management goals, which we'll get there. Those are the goals for each of those problem target species. Obviously, whether or not its efficacy on the target plant, or how well does it control that plant. And one consideration there is for these particular products, the manufacturer's label has specific plants listed. So that was one thing we consulted. Obviously, safety is a consideration, and then any restrictions. And this isn't just restrictions on the label, this is restrictions that are further imposed by ecology. So those things were considered. And again, a permit is required, and you do have to have a licensed applicator. So I'm just going to read through these really quickly. The goals of the plan. First, were to reduce the distribution and density of invasive plants, to improve recreational safety, usability, navigability of the lake, water quality and overall health, habitat for fish and other aquatic species. Secondly, to prevent the spread of invasives to and from Lake Roesiger. As I mentioned, the slender arrowhead is only found in 5 lakes, so we don't want it leaving your lake to go to others. And then to develop a comprehensive education outreach plan on prevention and effective control methods. So in meeting with the steering committee, we came up with a number of priorities. One of the first priorities was, or the first priority is addressing Eurasian watermilfoil, which is a Class B noxious weed. Now, I won't go into the details of what that means, but suffice to say that the Noxious Weed Board ranks weeds from A, B, and C, A being the highest priority, B being lowest, and C being the least. So Eurasian watermilfoil, and with Eurasian, it's by county. And so that you can read more about that in the plan. Suffice to say, though, that Eurasian watermilfoil is a Class B noxious weed. So that puts it higher on the radar than Class C weed, and would probably be more favorable in terms of getting funded. So the management goal for Eurasian water milfoil in this particular situation is to eradicate small infestations and to monitor and ensure early detections of any new infestations. The recommended approach to doing this is to continue the diver hand pulling, but to increase the frequency from every other year to annual. Optional is to consider the use of a particular aquatic herbicide, which trade name is Procelicor. And I emphasize optional because a lot of this achieving eradication for this particular plant greatly depends on how quickly there are boots on the ground doing this annual hand pulling. If this doesn't get funded for say 5 years and the plant just continues to spread, then diver hand pulling is unlikely to be successful, at least not on the time frame we're proposing. Priority 2 is Fragrant Water Lily, which is a Class C noxious weed. So the management goal for this, we recognize that full eradication is a desired goal of many in the community, but it may be difficult to achieve given the size and longevity of the infestation. I emphasize longevity because you have some massive roots that are and rhizomes from this plant that have been growing for decades. So eradication is unlikely. So we discussed the incremental goals toward eradication by hoping to reduce the rate of lake filling. We want to prevent further spread of lilies within the lake. So we don't want them to be increasing in the north and south basins. Obviously, improving navigation between the basins is really important, and navigation to lake residences. And reducing this coverage hopefully will slow any new sediment buildup in those lily beds. And ideally, it'd be great to reduce the historic buildup within the lily beds. So it got a little bit complicated trying to break this down, but we recommended 3 potential controls. We evaluated the use of hydraulic dredging, the chemical control, and mechanical harvesting. But this is in addition to individual efforts that I talked about that you can do, which is maybe some cutting and perhaps barriers. So the third priority are invasive shoreline plants. The goal is to prevent further spread, reduce the current coverage, and if possible, eradicate small areas of invasive knotweed and purple loosestrife. And then to, again, educate landowners on how to manage or remove. So the recommended control methods is really to rely on homeowners to control plants on their property, to increase that education on the identification and control methods. I kind of mentioned like how to be careful when you're cutting yellow flag iris, for example, and do that through landowner workshops and other outreach materials. The fourth priority is the Slender Arrowhead. Its management goals to reduce the rate of lake aging or filling in, which we heard from another number of residents that the presence of Slender Arrowhead was contributing to increased sedimentation. We also want to reduce the current coverage and increase landowner education with a target of 20% removal per year. And that really depends on funding. And the recommended methods for this is diver-assisted suction harvesting and potentially the use of aquatic herbicides such as Procelicor. So how would this, one of the common themes of the steering committee was a good prevention and outreach program. So, coming up with some education tools through that volunteers can actually go more of a peer-to-peer. So community members could visit the boat launch on heavy use days and provide education about cleaning, drying, and draining your boat. And then hopefully for lake residents, develop and implement an outreach campaign to prevent introduction of invasive species from, for example, boats. And this might be accomplished through mailers or email or other social media. So
Tony, you
Yes.
have 5 minutes.
All right. Okay. So we went through a number of scenarios, and I want to point out in the beginning what is common to all of the lily managements. I don't know what's up with the red dot. I'm really sorry. The common management actions for all of those scenarios. So for the case of Eurasian water milfoil, with the on the column where it says expected outcomes, you could also look at that as goals, to have eradication within 5 years followed by annual monitoring. And that would be accomplished, or the action column, through diver hand pulling and potentially the use of Procelicor. With invasive shoreline plants, again, it's really about prevention and reduce the existing areas or existing patches. And the action there would be through workshops and outreach to ID plants and go over prevention or control methods. And again, with Slender Arrowhead, it'd be that 20% removal per year using DASH, and invasive species prevention would be the expected outcome or goal would be to lower the risk of spread within the lake or to new populations through outreach. So this section is going to be consistent for all of the lily methods that we go over. So the first scenario for managing lilies uses hydraulic dredging to provide high impact to water lilies. So this section at the top here again is just the same as above, but what's different under scenario 1 is we looked at hydraulic dredging to achieve a goal of 80 to 90% lily reduction and roughly 3 feet of muck reduction. And then that's in the middle basin. In the north and south basin, the goal would be eradication of existing patches through DASH. I want to point your attention down to the expense of hydraulic dredging. 22.1, excuse me, let me back up. In the middle basin, 22 million in year 1, because this is just a one-time event. And then the remaining years reflect the other activities that are listed that are common to all of the scenarios. So in total, we're looking at 22.1 million after we add in efforts in the north and the south basin. And taking that to the next level, looking at how this could be broken out by parcel. I think Marissa is probably going to talk a little bit more about this, but they took the number of parcels that is around the lake and basically broke it down by, from this 22.1 million, broke it down by parcel. So roughly almost $48,000 per parcel in year 1 to implement scenario 1 using hydraulic dredging. If you factor in the grant, which I know Marissa is going to talk about that a little bit more, it's basically negligible under scenario 1 because we're still looking at over $47,000 per parcel in year 1. So under scenario 2, this assumes a chemical approach to impacting water lilies. Again, just focusing on what's different about scenario 2. This looks at the goal of 40 to 50% reduction in lilies, which is about a 12 to 15 acre area, using chemical approaches for the middle basin. It's worth noting that if this seems like a low number, you have to recognize we can't control really large areas of that thick of plant material with an aquatic herbicide. So this is what we're estimating over time and probably incrementing over a year how we achieve this, because this is just, I forgot to say, I'm sorry, but this is over a 3-year estimate that we examined. For the north and south basin, it would also be looking at eradication of existing patches. You'll notice that the cost per parcel prior to the grant is on the order of $216 in year 1 and 2, because the grant is a 2-year cycle, dropping a little bit in year 3 and then a little bit more in years 3, 4, and 5 as we assume better coverage. But so the cost per parcel with the grant, we're looking at about $135 in years 1 and 2, and then no changes thereafter when the grant expires. Scenario 3, we looked at a mechanical harvester. We thought it was important to include a scenario that did not include an aquatic herbicide. So again, just looking at where items are different for the middle basin, it would be looking at a 15 to 20% lily reduction using mechanical harvester again, with the idea of improving that center navigation channel and potentially deeper portions to residential channels. This is only 15 to 20% because a harvester, as I mentioned earlier, can't operate in shallow areas and it can't operate around submersed obstacles. For the north and south basin, it's unlikely that a harvester would make sense given the less dense patches and the potential for continued spread. So we'd rely more on workshops and outreach. So the scenario 4 assumes a status quo with a low level of Eurasian milfoil control. So the status quo being diver hand pulling every 2 years to basically maintain milfoil, but there's still the high risk for spread. This is currently $10,000 every other year, and it's paid for by volunteer lake association dues and donations. So this would not address lilies in the middle basin, and the middle basin would continue filling in. Did I make it in 5 minutes, Shannon?
You were close. You made it in 6.
Okay, well, again, we all want to thank everyone who has helped contribute ideas and share their thoughts, take our surveys, watch the video, read the executive summary. This is a real team effort, and I'm appreciative to be a part of it, and it's been great working with you all. And I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Marissa, unless, Marissa, do you want to say anything else?
Marissa, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you, Tony, for the great summary, and appreciate the review. I know some of you may have already seen some of that in the presentation, but we wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page before we got started. So if you have any questions, specific questions about the plan or anything I'm going to talk about, feel free to put those questions in the chat. We're not going to stop right now for questions, just because we want to kind of get all the information out there so that we can have a really good discussion. So feel free to put those in there. And so what we're going to head now is I'm going to be talking about the funding options for the plan first, and then we'll be talking about the survey results. So thank you all for participating in that. But we figured it might be best to talk about different ways that we could fund this plan, because then the survey results will make more sense. Okay, so the first way to obtain funding to apply for or to implement this plan would be to obtain a state grant. So as part of your boat registration fee that you pay, a portion of that funds goes towards funding work towards invasive aquatic plant control treatment. Or not just treatment, but any effort. It's run by the Department of Ecology with boat tab fees, as I mentioned. And in order to, this is the grant that is paying for the effort right now. You first apply for an integrated aquatic vegetation management plan grant. And then that leads you, once you have that plan in place, to be able to apply for an implementation grant. Those implementation grants are $75,000. And there's a $25,000 match that's required in order to obtain those grants. So for a whole project of $100,000, you can have $75,000 of it funded by the state. You must be a public agency to be an applicant. That's part of the reason the community came together and worked with the county to advocate for our staff here, me and or Jen and I, to apply for that grant on your behalf. Those grants last 2 years. So you only have a very short window to use that $100,000 or $75,000 of grant funds, and you must be complete by the time that is up. It is possible to apply again in the future, but your prioritization would be low compared to lakes that have not had previous funding. The other piece that's important is a class of noxious weed is important prioritization. So if you are a class A weed, will have the highest priority, then B, then C. And that's, again, more fully described in the plan, as well as the online presentation if you want more details on that. So that's your first option to fund this plan. There was a lot of questions about, well, what does the county contribute? What can they fund? And so basically our funding contributions at Surface Water Management, we are funded. We are your surface water utility provider and provide a variety of services. But those that are specific to Lake Roesiger is we have our volunteer lake monitoring program that we have a couple of our volunteers here tonight, it looks like. So they've been working on water quality monitoring the lake since the 90s. And so we work with them to do those water quality samples and provide reports and other things to you about your lake health. We are working on the lake level gauging that's supporting some of the other conversations happening at Roesiger regarding wake boats and other motorized watercraft. We also have our Lakewise outreach program that is available to all of you, which is about how to have take actions around your property that will help protect your lake, especially by reducing phosphorus pollution that can affect your water quality. And so those are our services available to you. In terms of aquatic plant control, we did have a couple decades of milfoil control work until our funding was cut for this program at the lake. And super appreciate that the community stepped up to continue those efforts to keep those low levels down. And also the grant writing and grant administration associated with this project and future projects is what our kind of contribution has been and could be. The other way to fund this, unfortunately, does fall with the community. So in order to implement these plans across the state, community members that live near lakes contribute to the funding of these types of projects. So there are a wide range of ways to collect funds or different options that you can do. The first is to have simple lake association collections. These can be very formal to informal, depending on the structure of your community. Typically, they tend to be voluntary dues or donations, unless you have some sort of legal HOA in place to collect those legally. So the good thing about these is Roesiger already has a structure in place to collect these, and with the Lake Roesiger Community and Boat Club. These are very flexible. Your community can choose however you want to spend those dollars, as long as it's within your bylaws and that sort of thing. And it's completely independent of the county, so there's no overhead, or you don't need approval to do different actions or other things. The cons of this is it can be inequitable. I believe in your current structure, it's completely voluntary. So some people may contribute and others not, and yet everybody might receive those benefits. And there's also a lot of uncertainty in funding unless there is some sort of mechanized way to collect funds. The second way is a more formal option called a lake management district. The state established this option. So it is in the state code that you can start a self-taxing district to fund specific lake management work. Lake Roesiger has had one of these in the past, back in the 80s, to fund the lake health study. It can be very effective because it allows a broad range of actions, and it's a very fair democratic formation process. So there is an extensive outreach and voting ballot process associated with this. The cons are it's complicated and not very flexible. It is because it's codified. It must meet very clear restrictions and that sort of thing. When you do set it up, it can require a bond to get it started. And we found that the startup costs are extensive. The last time we set that one up, it was over $30,000. So it can be a lot just to get it going because of all the administrative steps to do that. The next option is a surface water fee surcharge. And so this is basically all of you right now in your tax bills pay a surface water utility fee. That's a rate based on your residence. And other lake communities that have maybe had a lake management district in the past or are wanting to do a specific project just for this lake, for their lake, have used this, where you're basically requesting that your county council person raise your surface water fee charge, or have a surcharge, actually is the correct way to say it, above and beyond what you pay normally. That would specifically fund lake activities, however your group defines it, that would be included into the county's administrative code. So it is based on the existing tax structure. These are collected through your tax bill. So that is already a mechanism in place to collect those fees. But it is the county council person, if they, it requires a lot of community support for a county council person to submit an ordinance, trying to, increase your surface water fees. So there's got to be really strong support to do something like this. But it has been very successful at Lake Ketchum, Goodwin and Shoecraft. That's a very parallel case to Lake Roesiger. They use theirs for Eurasian water milfoil control, and Lake Serene. So there is a good precedent for this, and you can, I actually, if we have time, I can show you slides of what these look like. The pros of this structure is it's very equitable because everyone is contributing. The fee structure can be decided by the community within legal limits. So for example, at other lakes, there are shared community lots where, 20 properties all have access to one shoreline parcel. So maybe those 20 properties only pay $20 while shoreline parcels pay $100. So there are things that you can do to adapt the fee structure to your need as long as they're legal. Because it's a tax structure, it allows for senior exemptions if they already have that exemption. And there is less administrative overhead than the Lake Management District. It can take 1 to 2 years to set these up, depending on how quickly you take action. If these funds are collected through the county, we must do the contract management to ensure we're meeting all of the appropriate legal mechanisms for hiring people. And the way we've set it up for the other lakes that the county council prefers is to have it renew every 5 years. So it's not just something that's you put in place now into forever. You revisit it every 5 years to make sure the community is still on board and wanting to do that. So that could be a pro or a con, really. So that is all the information on the funding. Oh, actually, no, I take that back. There were a lot of questions about how this might look or what that process would look like for this last option. So the way it would look like is the community would develop a proposal for a fee of how much that fee would be and who would be the targeted parcels for that fee. They would take that to their county council representative. At Roesiger, you are lucky because you have 2. So you would be able to talk with both of your representatives, or maybe they could designate one to kind of be the main sponsor or lead. Then there would be outreach by the community. So you might have community meetings, a mailer, other things to let everybody know what's happening. And then there would be the county council process if it's supported. Now that outreach might be different a little bit in this case too, since we're doing a lot of the outreach up front here as well, but we'd have to figure out what the county council is looking for that outreach. And then if they support it, they would introduce it. It would go through that process, including public hearings and other things that would happen on it. And if it was passed, the assessment would begin in January of the next year. In order for that to happen, I believe it needs to be passed by the end of November to get the assessor's information so that they actually can collect the taxes in the next fiscal year. Okay, so I think a lot of you is maybe joining tonight to see the survey results. So it's pretty exciting. We had a great response on the survey. In total, we had 142 respondents. For those on the committee, this is a little different. I had 3 last minute ones, so I went ahead and added them to it. So we had a really great response. To put that into context, there's about 464 shoreline parcels, and we think about 420 or 25 unique landowners in that. So we're looking about a 35% response for shoreline landowners, at least in this. People heard about it through all sorts of mechanisms. We sent out postcards, next door, email was really popular, and I think neighbor to neighbor communication as well. Of those, the demographics, I know a lot of people were interested in which basins participated. So this was a self-identification. We had the majority, or not majority, but the largest proportion was from the North Basin with 56 individuals, and it varied across the middle and south basins. I'm going to see if I can put my pointer on. This is a laser pointer Tony was frustrated by. One thing that was interesting, there were 6 people that lived nearby. We did send the postcard to all of the streets that were around the community, but not actually shoreline landowners. And we only had about 6 of those respond because 2 of these others were actually seasonal landowners saying they lived on the lake, but didn't live there full time. And they didn't say which basin they lived on. And 2 were lake recreation visitors to the lake. Of those, 86% are members of the community and boat club, and 14% are not. So a good representation by the community and boat club. And so the first thing we asked is what was the priority of plants or targets to address. And so what we found was very similar to what the committee identified as Eurasian watermilfoil was the #1 priority, followed by lily. We hadn't asked the committee where they thought prevention fell. So the community did identify it as the 3rd priority, followed by the shoreline invasive plants, and then the slender arrowhead. So this was very consistent with how the plan that was presented to you in terms of priorities, it shook out for the community as well. The first question had to do with whether you agreed with the approach for your Eurasian watermilfoil that Tony presented, which was to do primarily diver hand pulling with Priscilla core if needed, if the population got very large. We had about 3/4 of the lake agree with that. And those that didn't agree or would like to see some changes, the majority response there for those 14 of the 141 people where they don't agree with use of any chemicals. So they might support the diver suction or diver hand pulling, but not the Priscilla core as a backup. And pretty consistently across all of these choices, there were 2 people that indicated everything was too costly. So there definitely was a high concern with these 2 people about the cost. And there were actually 2 people that actually would prefer that we use chemicals as a first approach and not divers as well. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but one of the reasons that we included the Procellacor in there as a kind of backup up front is because we want to make sure that if it is something that the community wants to move forward on, that we have that kind of approved and in the toolbox, because it is, milfoil especially is one of those things that rapid response is important. So it is good to decide this now while the plan is out there versus after the plan has been approved. The next approach or next survey question was about the invasive shoreline plant goal and approach. 87% of landowners agreed with this approach, so pretty nearly consensus. Those that didn't agree felt that there should be a professional approach, not necessarily relying on landowners. This was particularly brought up for knotweed in a couple cases. And this is one of the potential tweaks in the plan. And one of the things that we could also look into is having more support from the county noxious weed control board for knotweed in particular for those few parcels that had that. Again, too costly by 2 respondents. And there's also a desire to have a chemical option for knotweed. And this would kind of go back to those outreach and education of what the best control methods are approach again that we'd be looking at for this. The next one was Slender Arrowhead goal and approach. We structured this one slightly different because this seems to be the biggest question mark of how much effort people wanted to have on this plant because it was the lowest priority plant. One of the benefits of working on this plan is it is a Class B noxious weed. So if we include this in a grant application, it does promote it to a higher priority similar to milfoil, but it also is lower priority. So we asked if they agreed with the approach of 20% a year was our initial approach through diver assisted suction harvesting, but that would be scaled basically on how much funding we were able to obtain. So this might be the one that might get decreased if funding was lower or increased if it was higher. And we had 14% say they agree with that, but would like a higher level of effort. 9 would like a lower level of effort, and 6 just didn't agree. And the higher level of effort, there was a really consistent message about that it wasn't just the lilies causing muck buildup, that this plant was causing muck buildup in front of their property. So they thought it should be a higher priority. And also that property owners could do some pulling of this plant on their own. And the good thing about this plant, it's really shallow rooted. So it is easy to pull in shallow areas. And especially if you collect that material to remove it so it can't spread to other areas. Those that said a lower level effort said to really just focus all of our money on the higher priorities and that it's not really a problem. And the 6 that did not agree, they wanted a chemical approach, which we didn't choose a chemical approach because there has not been a lot of research on chemicals. There is one study showing Procellacor could be effective, which is the same treatment that's potentially from milfoil. And again, cost was an issue, especially for 3 people in this one. How am I doing on time, Shannon?
You got about 6 minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna have to pick up the pace a little bit. So for the next step, there was a new invasive prevention. We had 85% agree with this approach. So pretty high agreement. The reasons for not supporting is the biggest one is they don't think it's effective. So it's hard to reach that boat launch community in particular. And there's a lot of apathy there and concerns about that. There was some desire to have boat inspections. We did look at this as part of the plan, but they're very expensive to implement. So we did not include that as a recommended approach. And they wanted a fee for boat launch users. Another good suggestion was to have the club be used as for outreach, really emphasizing the club's role in reaching out to community members. Okay, the next one, and this is where, as Tony said, it kind of got confusing a little bit more, and there seems to be a lot more diversity of opinions is when you talk about the different scenarios for fragrant water lily control. So the first scenario is for dredging. There is definitely a recurring theme that most everybody loves the idea of dredging because it'd be great to get rid of all that sediment, which is a huge problem on top of the lilies. But generally it's way too expensive. So you can see the strongly oppose is dark red, oppose is a lighter red, the yellow is supporter oppose, and the different shades of blue are support or strongly support. So we had over 50% of the people not supporting dredging, just, you know, fairly low support, mostly due the comments were clearly because of the cost. Chemical treatment. This is definitely the one that spurred the most comments among the scenarios. But we did have 63% that strongly supported or supported this. I feel that, okay. And then we had 1727 that were strongly opposed or opposed to it. So there is definitely this one that there was a pretty broad base of support for it. A lot of people said they'd rather have dredging, but this is the best option we can come up with, so they're going for it. And that it's most effective. There were a couple of people that really want to combine chemical and harvest. And what I'm missing there is the people that said they weren't into chemical treatment. I believe there were 14 of those. Maybe that's on the slide when we talk about their best option. And there was also some concern that individuals should be able to treat in front of their properties, as well as doing a chemical treatment of other properties, was one of the concerns that came up. Mechanical harvesting. This is another one that had pretty broad support. 50% supported it, but there was a higher percentage that really were kind of neutral on this one, and a lower percentage of those opposing. And the reasons most people wanted to do this one, or that was cited, is they preferred this option because there was no chemicals, though others wanted to combine the chemical and the harvest option as well. And the status quo was the last one. And I think this one, surprisingly, even was more overwhelmingly opposed to than the dredging. So there's generally really don't want to continue. There's generally a broad support for moving forward to do something. The comment that came up most frequently on why they oppose this is that the middle basin issue, if this is mainly a middle basin issue, and the middle basin should pay more or pay for it, or also they don't want chemicals. And again, the two people that consistently were concerned about cost of any kind. So the last question is, which do you feel is the best scenario for invasive aquatic plant control? And we found that 55% agreed with chemical, 15% for harvest, 16% for status quo, and 14% for dredging. So the dominant or the preferred scenario was chemical. And I did put this in by basin. That was a request, I believe, from the committee. They wanted to see kind of the number per basin. And so you can see that there's somewhat of a, well, you can just look and see for yourself what those are. And then I guess the very last question is, one option was for residents to pay an annual fee to pay for aquatic plant control. And as Tony presented, we basically just took what the total plan costs were and divided by the total number of parcels to give you some sense of what this might cost if it was evenly divided among the community. This is not like final numbers, but a rough estimate of what something like this take to do. And so the amount of the mid-range of those two options, which was the chemical and the harvesting, was $134 to $177 per year. And so what we found is that 53% of the community would be supportive of paying that amount. 25% they said we'd be willing to pay even more than that. And another 10% said we'd be willing to pay some, but not $135, or I think I wrote that wrong. It should have been $134. Sorry, in my graph there. So this one was the one that surprised me the most. There is a pretty high support level of wanting to pay for this. General comments that came out, there was 6 comments specifically saying we need to act now. And there were a lot of questions about payments and funding, that the Middle Basin should pay more, the county state should pay more. It's fair that everybody contributes. There's a fear of mandatory fees for 3 people. And there was a 2 comments about how it shouldn't just be shoreline parcels, should be parcels near the lake should pay. And thank you. There were 11 that just expressed thanks for all the work that was done. So appreciate that. So here is kind of the survey takeaways. So the idea is we have to take the survey and move it forward to finalize the plan. And I think the big thing that we saw is there's a pretty strong support that action is needed. So 80% do not support or strongly support status quo. So people don't want the status quo anymore. We agree on the priorities of plants. So there seems to be pretty broad agreement on that, or roughly on that. And there's a high agreement on our approach for these 4 kind of elements of the plans. Other survey takeaways for lily control. there is not a desire for dredging, 60% oppose or strongly oppose. And like I mentioned before, we don't want the status quo, 70% oppose or strongly oppose, and another, I think 10 were neutral. So people want to move forward. Chemical mechanical harvesting were both supported. So they were both dominated by blue, chemical a little more than mechanical, but these were both options that the community majority supported. Now there were certainly opposition to these for both of these approaches, but the majority did approve those. And when you put it all together, chemical control is the preferred option that was emerged from the community. So, and the last thing is that there is a high willingness to pay in the ballpark that we gave of 135 to 177 or more than that. We'd have to do a little more to figure out what that would be for these people that are less than 135 of what they would be willing to pay. But in general, it looks like people are willing to financially contribute to this project. So that leads us to our next steps. And I think those last couple of slides are probably what we're going to want to discuss as well as these next steps. So our next step is to vote on the final plan. And so based on the initial results, it looks like that final plan would be comprised of the scenario 2 with chemical treatments as the primary method. But because mechanical harvesting was very supported, that it looks like this, it should also be included as a future tool that can be used in the toolbox, especially if it becomes more cost effective. So if we can have, for example, there potentially is a harvester that somebody constructed on the lake that may be willing to, be doing that, and that would significantly reduce costs for that because there wouldn't be mobilization, demobilization, they wouldn't be coming from across the state, or there might be another new local contractor, because that's one of the big costs of that is that the current contractors are far away and we're not even sure they would come for this project or not. So the idea is to keep mechanical harvesting as a tool that is a good priority for those areas where it will work. And then also use those feedback and comments to fine tune. There were a lot of good small comments of ways to improve it. But those would kind of be more in the details of the plan. But otherwise, it would basically be that scenario 2 that includes all of the actions for the other plans with the chemical treatment as the primary method. And the important thing is that this is really a starting point. So the integrated aquatic vegetation plan that we end up with is by its nature supposed to be an adaptive plan. So we would work closely if this did get implemented and funded to touch in with the community every year, see if there's new technologies or other ways, assess what we're doing, see how it's working, and adapt as we go. And the next step, if assuming the plan is approved, because we cannot move forward and get funding on this from the state unless the plan's approved. And for it to be approved, there needs to be widespread support from the community, which it looks like there should be based on the original initial survey. But the next step would be to use the approved plan as a foundation. We would need a letter of community of support. And this application deadline is December 1st. So basically, what I didn't mention, sorry, I should have done that the final vote would be we'll be doing an online survey starting on the 28th, because we need a day or two to get it up and running. And it would run through November 10th. So the reason we have that deadline or timeframe in there is because we need to have it approved by that time. So Jen and I have enough time to write a grant and submit it by December 1st. So it is very tight. The community can also decide to wait a year and not apply for it this year. But if we want to apply for it this year to start, that grant would start in July of 2022. We would need to apply for it this year. Otherwise, it would be July of 2023. The next step would be to create a community funding structure. So looks like there's strong support to move forward. So we need to decide what that funding structure looks like. We recommend that the Lake Roesiger Community and Boat Club designate an invasive plant committee, maybe like 7 people or so based on other ones, to help develop what that funding structure will look like and also be the liaison with the county moving forward. If you decide you want to do the swim surcharge, then you would need to develop a funding proposal. So it would need to be done by the spring at the latest so it can be passed by 2023, because we would not begin work or accept the grant until we know you have that funding structure in place for the next year. That would require working with the county council to pass it and then starting collection in 2023. If you don't want to use a swim surcharge and you prefer another option, like if the community wants to raise it all on their own, we need to know that right away because that would again affect the grant timeline and whether we play it this year or not. So that's kind of a decision point for the community as well, as which funding they would like to do. And lastly, in the interim, let's prevent any new problems. Please clean, drain, and dry your boat anytime you launch or leave the lake, both at Lake Roesiger or any other lake around the state. So with that, we are going to start the community discussion. And so we'll be facilitating that. Everybody here, I know you've come here and probably have information you want to share. So we just ask you raise your hand to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk. We're recommending that we limit their comment to about a minute. And just keep it kind. You know, we're all community members or staff supporting you all. So I know this community is really fantastic and look forward to talking to you about this. So I'm going to escape so I can start seeing you all again. You raise your hand. That's a good question. There was if you go down to the bottom of your screen, on most people, it might look slightly different. You'll look for a button called reactions. And when you click on that, there should be an option to raise your hand. And Jen, do you know what for those of you that are on the phone, what the keyboard shortcut is for raising your hand?
I have no idea, but let me look that up.
We will look that up. And for those of you that are on the phone, we'll share that in just a minute. So, okay. So if anybody want to go ahead and get started, just raise your hand. It looks like Harry Gibbons, our consultant, was the first person to raise his hand. If I assume, was that right? Or no, is that an accidental hand? Okay. DS, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and share?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. My question is, did everybody that has a parcel around the lake get notified of this? Because I talked to people, they never got a card.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we sent actually 2 different postcards. The first one we sent, I don't remember the date. I think it was October 1st. It was mailed, and it did take some people 2, almost 3 weeks to get the postcard, though we did hear from most of the people on the board that they received theirs. Definitely seemed to be a big postal delay. And so we were so concerned about it. We actually mailed another postcard. We thought maybe somebody just dumped part of them somewhere. So we mailed another one about a week and a half before the survey was closed to make sure everybody got that. I did get a number of them returned. So if you are one person that didn't receive the postcard, or if you know of anybody, please tell us. They might need to check their taxpayer address with the assessor's office, because there do seem to be issues that happen there, and we can share how to change those addresses for them. But we did make every attempt to reach everybody.
And Marissa, I would like to add that we sent it to taxpayer addresses, not the actual situs address, not your actual physical location, because
Right.
many places are either rentals or they don't have an actual mail receptacle. So we use the taxpayer address for every single parcel.
Oh, that's good to know, because we don't have a post office, a postal box there, but we have it. You send it to our house. I got one, but the people I talked to did not get one. And the response was kind of low for as many people as, you know, it impacts. As far as if they're going to have to start paying extra taxes and stuff, everybody should know about it.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely tried our best effort, and we'll be sending another postcard out about the final vote. We're going to be designing that and sending out tomorrow. Well, probably won't get sent till the next day, but certainly concerned. And 30% on a survey based on our experience is really good response rate from what we've seen. So not to say that it's not a shame that we couldn't have a higher percentage, obviously, but we're pretty happy with that return rate based on just kind of what we know about survey science.
Okay.
But yeah, the more people we can get, so it's great for everybody that's here tonight to be able to share that and about the final vote. And anybody that needs to get it, please, yeah, let us know if we can help in that anyway. But renters will not have received it though. So that is I guess, an important point when you're talking to somebody.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have their hand raised? Want to share some feedback or ask a question? Could be way ahead of schedule if the discussion's not very much. There's some, Ron Johnson has been putting in the chat some of the information about the per parcel cost. And lastly, added the comment, my preference would be to treat a larger area than recommended, but for a shorter duration. Is one comment. I guess I can respond to that a little bit. With the chemical approach, at least, we are limiting the amount of area we can treat each year, because if all the plants die at once, as they decompose, it can decrease oxygen. So the state does limit how much of an area you can treat at one time. So we are somewhat limited with the chemical option. Okay, looks like Jeff Barnett, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi there, this is actually Julie Barnett on my husband's computer. Question for you about how many parcels, and I apologize, you probably said, but how many parcels are there that touch the lake? And if you're on a parcel that is considered a double lot, are you counted as 2 parcels or are you 1 parcel?
So there were 464 parcels in our initial assessment of the lake shoreline. If we needed to do a more thorough review, we would do that, but that's our initial assessment. Jen, do you want to explain the double parcel? I think you did a better job of that than I did.
So this is all just initial assessment. So this is to get the engineer's estimates and estimates to give you guys an idea. If you guys were to move forward as a community to do a surcharge onto your property taxes, this would go through a legal process and we would have the experts come in. So as I can't remember, I think it might have been Allison that asked before, if you have tax exempt properties, that tax exemption still maintains for other taxes. If you are senior exempt, that senior exempt still plays into a surcharge. So all of those things would be gone through and reviewed before the code would be changed. And so you would know. I'm not a tax parcel expert, so I would have to rely on those in the county that are. But if you have multiple parcels and you pay property taxes and you pay surface water utility fees on multiple parcels, then you would be charged likely multiple times for any kind of surcharge that your community would bring forward to your council person.
One thing we have seen at other lakes that have put these into place is there is a legal mechanism to join your parcels. So you only get charged once as well.
Well, I mean, our parcel is treated as 1 parcel, but I know when you look at the map, we're twice as wide as most of the parcels around. So I was just trying to understand if it's based off of the original, like the way the parcels were parceled out initially way back when, or if it's based on, taxpayer parcels, if you will, the individual there. Okay, thank you.
Taxpayer parcels.
Thank you.
Okay, Allison, I think you were next. Okay, we'll have maybe Ron Johnson go next and we'll come back. Oh wait, Allison, are you there now?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay. Allison, you seem to be breaking up. If you can hear us, you might turn your video off. That might help. In the meantime, let's go back to Ron Johnson and we'll pick up Allison when she's got a better connection.
Okay, this is Ron. One request that I would have for maybe clarifying the coverage of Middle Lake is when we're talking about 15% lily removal or 50% lily removal or whatever, how much and where would that actually occur? I mean, are we 15%? Are we just talking maybe widening the channel, boating channel a little bit? And 50%, okay, how much would that actually remove?
And where?
And where?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ron. So we, again, would be working with whichever committee was established, to consult with. But in general, the priorities we heard from the committee and the community is that there would be the highest priority is to ensure that there's a reduction of lilies in the main navigation channel between the north and south basins is the #1 priority. And the second priority would be then to have channels to and from the residences that live on there. So we would probably go with that prioritization and then, incrementally chip away at everything in between. But it's probably going to be one of the trickiest things to figure out in the first year or two, because we're also limited on how much you can treat in any given year. So is to figure out where we prioritize those. And so we'd work those exact locations out with the committee, but under that scheme.
The other question would be, if the lilies are dying every year and decomposing anyway, what's the difference between dying normally and dying by chemical?
Great question. I'm going to let Harry Gibbons answer this one, or Tony, whoever wants to take that one. Feel free.
I'll start. The rapidness of the death after treatment and the decay is much faster, so the oxygen demand is much higher. Therefore, the oxygen goes down faster than the senescence that takes weeks, several weeks, 6 to 8 weeks before the plants die back, and then it takes several weeks after that before it decays, and all that is occurring in the fall towards the winter, so it lowers the temperature, so the rate of that decay is much slower. So part of the reason why the state imposes a treatment area limit is because when the plants are poisoned all at once, they're not senescing over 6 to 10 weeks, they're dying within a week, and that has a tremendous, and the temperature of the lake's higher, so that has a tremendous strain on the oxygen levels and can cause problems. So, Tony, you want to add to that?
I guess I would say that is a very good question, and Marissa's right. We spent quite a bit of time thinking through that, and that's where this committee would serve. Again, reiterating Marissa's point. With the plan, the intent is to present these options to the community and get everyone in agreement, at least majority, of what tools make the most sense. But this is adaptive, so what you can do in year 1 versus year 2 is it depends on the tool, but it also depends on the density, available funds. So there's so many questions about how to prioritize this that don't necessarily have to be worked out right now. I can understand as a landowner that there would be a tremendous desire to know that, but until we know if it's going to get funded, until we know what the final vote is for the community members, it's just difficult to get to that level of detail, I guess. Even though I completely understand the desire to know that. I wonder that I live in a place where we have snow removal problems, and my street is the very last one, if it ever gets a snowplow. So I understand, I understand that question. I think Harry did a good job answering the difference between those two. Did that answer your question, Ron, about the decomposition of natural versus a chemical application?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Hey, let's see. It looks like there was a hand up Kelly, looks like you're up next.
Yeah, hi, thank you, and thanks for putting this together. I'm on the Middle Basin, new residents since April, wife and a daughter. And I wonder if there are resources available from residents of Lake Goodwin and some of the other lakes that have had treatments done, that we could find out the results or their satisfaction with what they've done for their invasive aquatic life.
Well, I can speak to a little bit that, and feel free for anybody else to jump in. But I think the most parallel case that we've worked with is Lake Goodwin and Shoecraft. We've been working on Eurasian watermilfoil control with them since the 90s, and we work with a steering committee there, and we also have a project website. So certainly we can't share their information directly, but we can ask them if anybody's interested in talking to them. You can visit our project website and see what the results are there. There's also several private lake communities that are working in invasive aquatic plant control. Sunday Lake has been doing fragrant water lily control and can speak to you, and we've been talking with them to kind of get lessons learned from them as well. With other jurisdictions, there's been Lake Ballinger is doing they're implementing their integrated plan with the city of Mount Lake Terrace and city of Edmonds, and they are focusing on fragrant water lily and Eurasian watermilfoil as well. So we can certainly provide the context there. And we also consult regularly with Ben Peterson in King County with their noxious weed work to kind of hear about their successes. So I'm sure we can connect you to those as well. We do bring some of those up into the plan as well in terms of the results on the ground in the full plan, which most people probably didn't get to. If you did, I'm very impressed. But there are some examples on there. Is there anything else, Tony, or anybody?
I would just like to add that when you're talking about Goodwin Shoecraft for milfoil control, that is a combination of diver hand pulling and most frequently every 5 to 6 years chemical control, and then most recently dash. So we have diver suction hand pulling as necessary, but mostly diver hand pulling. And it's a combination of all those tools over decades to keep the milfoil at a minimum. And then Sunday Lake also is using chemical control as their primary method. And then Lake Ballinger is also chemical control for their primary method for both milfoil and the fragrant water lily.
Kelly, did that answer you, or do you have any follow-up on that?
Yeah. So what I heard is you've got resources on your website that I'll check out. I appreciate the comments on the other lakes.
Okay. I believe so DS, you've spoken once, so I'm going to have the other hands go first. Looks like we've got Tegan and Jessica next. I hope I said that right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I was just wondering if there's any other options as far as funding that we could cover a wider area and kind of bring down the cost. I mean, I'd rather pay nothing, obviously, but something that's more manageable for everybody, I think would be good. If we're talking $200 a year or whatever. So would there be a way to say tax boater tabs or any registered boat within 15 miles of the lake or something of that nature, so we can have a bigger pool to reduce the cost for everybody that's potentially attending the lake?
So I just want to jump in and say that all registered boaters are already taxed, and that goes through the state. And that money is already utilized for a bunch of statewide programs and to maintain that public boat launch. It is very unlikely that we would be able to get funding from them to do this very specific project. The grant that we are talking about and the grant that we are using to do this plan is from the state. And right now that is the primary mechanism to get extra dollars from the state to do this type of work. We are also utilizing our surface water utility money to help match this grant. So there are dollars coming in from the state and the county to do this plan and would move forward doing the implementation. But unfortunately, the funding buckets are not very big.
Okay, just wanted to cover that because I mean the best method obviously seems to be the very, very, very expensive one, but it is prohibitively expensive. Of course, I mean you're talking hey you got your regular bills. Here's an extra $50,000 bill. It's not really going to be manageable for anyone, regardless of whether you think it's the best or the worst method. So I'm just trying to figure out, something. I mean, I didn't get a chance to look over things before, so I didn't vote in the survey. I was actually planning on doing it Sunday night, and of course my power went out. So, I'm gonna have to go back and look at the presentation that you guys already put together. But I generally would prefer not to have chemicals. Is there's usually, long-term things that you don't really discover for 10, 20, 30 plus years on a lot of things, it seems like, when it comes to chemicals.
I hate to cut you off, Kelly,
another method.
but you're at your limit.
Okay.
So if there's more time and everyone's had a chance to speak, you're welcome to raise your hand again and if you've got more thoughts, but definitely worth looking at the plan and the kind of fuller overview. If you haven't got a chance, it'd be really good. I think that brings up a question that also popped up in the chat about who gets to vote and who would be charged. So for the purposes of approving this plan, the answer of who gets to vote is anybody that lives on the lake shoreline, lives near the lake shoreline, or uses the lake for recreation. But we will be asking which of those you fall under in the final vote, so that we do have a good understanding, particularly if the taxation piece, if the community goes that way, you'll be able to distinguish who voted on what. So there is a question about also whether multiple parcels would have multiple votes. And it is something that came up during this first thing. And so this is something it seems like people want to see. So if we did that, the only way I can think to do that is for people to be asked to enter their address or their personal ID number so we can confirm that. So again, this isn't a vote to approve the plan. This isn't actually the official vote to institute taxing. That would be approved if you do the surface water fee through the county council process. So I think those questions become a little more relevant when it's through that county council process in terms of voting. But at the same time, this will provide you a really good baseline of understanding of who supports the plan and whether they would support funding that plan that you can provide your county council. So I think it would be wise to include a mechanism there to track if people have multiple parcels. Jen, is there anything you'd add to that, or do you?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that we're asking you to approve a plan, and this is a plan with a bunch of tools and a toolbox to be able to address multiple invasive plants. We're not asking pay your taxes tomorrow. That's a process that you'll have to start up with your county council person. And we would definitely be there to help shepherd you through that process. But this is focusing right now on this plan that we put together so that we could wrap up this grant and hopefully apply for another one so that you get as much extra funding dollars as you can.
I know we have a couple more, several other questions coming through in the chat. So, but we're going to work through the people raising their hands and then come back to those in the chat. So next we have Denise.
Hi. Have they used chemicals in the lake before to treat this problem?
At Lake Roesiger, there has not been a chemical treatment that I'm aware of. It's possible individual landowners have. There was a failed attempt where a group of landowners got together to apply for a chemical herbicide permit. And unfortunately, the professional applicator they hired didn't do the notification process correctly as part of that permit process. And so when that was discovered, the applicator was very apologetic and did not move forward on that treatment. But it was a pretty contentious time for the lake, I believe. But that treatment never occurred. And I think that's an important point that people have asked and brought forward. If chemicals were not included in part of this plan, it doesn't prevent landowners from applying for a permit to do it on their own. But if this plan is approved, the county would hold that permit then to apply those chemicals if we move forward with the grant funding and go that route.
And just to clarify what Marissa said on their own, that is to apply for the permit on their own and be the permit holder, but you have to have a professional aquatic herbicide applicator to apply these specially formulated aquatic herbicides to the plants. Not any person can just grab anything off of low shelf and dump it in the lake. It has to go through a permitting process. You have to have a licensed applicator and you have to use an approved chemical by the Department of Ecology.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Jen. You can't even purchase these chemicals as a resident unless you're a professional chemical applicator. So
if the resident applied for that, would the rest of us be notified?
You would if you were within the treatment notification required by the state within the treatment area. So there's a certain distance that's required for permit notifications. I'm not sure what that is offhand, but the Department of Ecology permitting staff could clarify that. But yes, you should receive a postcard both when they apply for the permit, and then if they obtain the permit, you will also receive a treatment notification And if you live on the lake, you will receive a notification on your dock before it's done, if they successfully or go through that permitting process.
Marissa, I have a permit up if you're interested in the notification.
Yes, that'd be great.
So in what Marissa was referring to is the aquatic plant and algae management general permit that is put together by Ecology. A lot of your questions might actually be answered if you read this very riveting long document, but at the end it lists all the notifications that are required. The permittee, which in this discussion, being a resident, this would be a big task for a resident to take on, but the permittee must provide residential and business notice to all waterfront residences and businesses within 1/4 mile in each direction along the water body shoreline or across the water from proposed treatment areas. And I can put this link in the chat if anybody would like to take a look at this. But it also goes over the number of days. So further down, businesses and residents must receive the notice at least 10 days in advance and at most 42 days. And it goes on to some caveats. So there was a question in the chat about notifications, so that might answer both questions.
Okay, thanks, Denise. I don't see any other hands that are people that haven't spoke, so I'm going to go ahead and go to DS now.
I have a quick question. How safe are these chemicals that they're using if you use the water? The people on both sides of me, they use lake water in their homes to bathe, and they don't have the city water down to their places. And because a lot of people are limited as to how much city water they can use, so then they water everything with lake water because that's all that's available. How safe are these chemicals that they're going to use for the residents that are bathing in it and watering their plants?
Tony, do you want to cover this one?
My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen or Marissa, is that I didn't think that there were any permits for potable water. I know there are a number of permits for irrigation, and the labels and for these potential products that we've been exploring have very specific language about how to notify anyone who has a irrigation permit to, like you say, water the garden, the grass, the whatever. And so there are measures that are, there's certain setbacks from those intakes that the applicator has to adhere to. So it's, so the applicator will do the research to find out where those permitted intakes are located. If someone's taking water and it's not permitted, there's no way for the county or the applicator or anyone to know how to avoid that impact, other than they would be notified through the ecology notification system.
Also, if it went through the county, how we do this with other lakes that we hold permits on is that we notify every single shoreline landowner within the treatment area. And it does have a clause in there saying, if you do use this lake for potable water, please contact us and we can set up some other source of water during the treatment. And whatever the treatment window or the time that you're not supposed to be using that water, that's when we would supply that water source. We are required to pull all of the water rights that are through the state. And so if someone has a water right for potable water, which nobody currently does on Lake Roesiger or for irrigation, everybody is notified. And it's a very short time. Most of these chemicals degrade pretty quickly in sunlight. So the residence time is not very long. They're not hanging out in the water for very long periods of time. They're formulated specifically for water. It's not what you're buying from Lowe's. Like the ones off the shelf at your Home Depot and your Lowe's are just overloaded with chemicals to basically overdo what a very, very small amount can do. So it's a very different formulation. It's a very different process, and it goes through a very stringent review through the EPA and through the state.
Thanks. And those water rights are in the plan actually as an appendix. So you can see all those that were pulled from the state's database as well. Good question. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I think we're going to jump back over to the chat. I'll I'll scroll through, but if anybody else that's quicker than me,
Marissa, I'll just give you a little time update.
Sure.
You have about 10 more minutes left in the discussion session.
okay, great. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
So there's been some questions about whether individuals can be trained on how to do milfoil hand pulling. And that actually is something that was exciting that happened this year after the aquatic plant survey that was done. Well, I should back up. The Community and Boat Club hired seascapes divers to go out and do a plant survey and pull any milfoil they found, which was great. So we got rid of a couple of hot spots there through that. And then when Jen and I went out on the survey, we found a couple other areas of milfoil. And it was hard because we knew it was just there, but we're not divers. We couldn't get it or wouldn't be allowed to as part of our job. But some volunteer divers from the lake got together. They watched some videos on how to carefully remove the milfoil and were able to successfully do that. So definitely reach out to the community club to be connected with that group. So that was exciting. And these are the types of things that when I talked about adaptive management, we are developing a plan based on, the resources that are available right this minute. But that's the type of thing that could be adapted. So if we get milfoil to really low levels, maybe we don't have to hire that professional contractor. It might just be, some divers looking over those hotspots again out in the future that we can work with the community to do.
And also to add, we did share that additional area of milfoil with Seascapes. So they do have it for their mapping needs as well, if they were ever hired again by Lake Roesiger.
This is Brian. We do plan on looking at those spots again at the beginning of the year. And we do plan on looking for volunteers to kind of be brought up to speed by Chris and Christine to do the milfoils, cases like that. Because it's best to catch them right away than let them spread in that. So I think it was Bill that left a comment on that. So if you can get a hold of either community relations or myself, yeah, we can hook you up with that. We do want to start something like that because you don't want it to sit around for a year or anything, but thanks.
There was another question about the voting, about the same people being charged who can vote. So I think there's a couple things embedded in there. So one, we're including lake users and others in the plan review because they are a stakeholder and that's part of the state's process. So they will get a vote on whether they approve of that plan or not. But like I said, we will track them so we kind of know we're not going to be able to charge the random resident that already paying through their boat tab fees. It will be up to the community to decide what that funding structure looks like though otherwise. So I know some people are thinking that it would be good to charge people that live across the street from the lake, but still are involved in it. And the community will have to kind of weigh whether that's a good idea or not. Because on the one hand, it's good because it distributes the fee more, but on the other hand, you also want to pass it through your county council. So those will be the types of decisions the community has to make in terms of who is charged. But for voting on this plan, this is again just voting on the plan. Are these the right tools? Do we have the right priorities? Is this the right approach? And that's what we're really voting on. But we will ask the questions about funding so you have that to move that forward. Going back, if anybody else sees a question before I get there, jump in. Oh, there's a question. Do I need a permit to pull Arrowhead up in front of our place? That's a good question. There is a pamphlet that's called the Aquatics, Plants and Fish booklet. And if you have that, you are allowed to do some of that hand control work. And since these are all noxious weeds, the ones we've talked about, the lily, the arrowhead, and those shoreline invasive plants, you can do control of those by hand removals. So the digging up, the pulling, the cutting. But we do request that you remove all that plant material from the lake, one, so it doesn't spread to other people's properties, and two, so it doesn't cause water quality problems in the areas that plant decays. This would be the type of thing that we'll have really, if this gets approved, this is the type of thing we'd have really specific workshops on of all the ways you can control it and how you would do it, as part of this plan.
I just added the link to that pamphlet in the chat. And so this pamphlet is important to read through and have on hand because it does act as your HPA, your permit to do that kind of in-water work. So we also have it on our webpage as well. And you can also email us at any time if you have questions.
So there's a question by Charles. Is it possible to apply the chemicals when people and animals are not as active in the water? and indicates also they personally despise the safety assurance regarding the chemicals due to not being comfortable enjoying the lake when they are applied. We're really limited in terms of when you can apply these chemicals in terms of when they're going to be most effective in treating the plants. So for example, if we were doing Eurasian watermilfoil control, whether it's diving or chemical, the goal is to get the plant out as early in the year as possible, because later in the summer, it does this thing called auto-fragmentation where it breaks apart and each little 1-inch fragment can form new plants. So that is done as early as possible. Whereas lily control, if you do the herbicide approach, you would want to wait until the plant begins translocating nutrients back to its rhizomes. And so that's typically in late summer, fall. And Tony or Harry, jump in if I got that right, or you have anything to add on that. So we would avoid applying it, right before the weekend. We would do it, earlier in the week if at all possible, or making sure that, and Tony, can you speak to what the recreational windows are, restrictions, how long those last on these? I don't think there's very many for any of these chemicals, but
I know Percellacor does not. I'm pretty sure Amazomox and Imazapyr do not either. And that's one of the reasons we looked at those products instead of something like glyphosate, which, has had a lot of bad attention in many ways for good reason. So and also a couple of other chemicals could have worked for milfoil, but they do have, I believe it's a swimming restriction for 24 hours. It's imposed by ecology, which is above and beyond what is on the label. So I would say with the very limited number of products available for aquatic herbicide applications, in my mind, we've picked the very best that we could for the target species. So
meaning based on what ecology is doing, the use restrictions are very low on these, that you basically,
yes.
You don't want to be in the water when the boat's going by, but otherwise you can start using the water with Percellacor, and the others we'd have to look for sure, but I think it's 24 hours.
Yeah, and just to clarify, all of that would be posted. So large 2x3 posters go into every public area. So it would be the park, it would be the boat launch, any shared community access or property. And then every shoreline gets posted. And so everyone is notified if a treatment were to occur, if you do it properly under the permit. So everybody would know what those restrictions are. We also send out mailers and we post it on web pages.
Okay, going backwards in the comments, I see a question by Andy Locke. I didn't see where monitoring costs were presented within each treatment type, such as the survey used for the current draft plan. And that's a great question. The monitoring section is one of the plan that we haven't written yet because we weren't sure what we would be monitoring yet. But this is something that certainly if we went forward, the county would be committed to ensuring that we included monitoring. And then that's something we've done very extensively at Lake Roesiger and Shorecraft, doing a follow-up survey, following treatments to kind of assess where they are, because we need that monitoring data to adaptively manage. But you're right, those costs are not in there. That would likely be in county staff time. But good point. We will need to include that especially when we think about the grant, if we're moving forward on this grant. If anybody else has a question, you can raise their hand. Does anybody else see anything in the chat that has not been addressed? Charles Lundvall, I think we answered your question about what time of year would chemicals be applied. It would be in the late summer and early fall for lilies and milfoil. If we came to that right now, we wouldn't be. That would be more in the spring. I don't know if there's a treatment timing window on Roesiger. It might be after July 4th is the earliest you can apply on that lake, actually. So, okay. I think that's all the questions in the chat, unless one has come in. There's one more question, I think, about the notifications. The notifications, if you were doing an actual treatment, I think that's what the question is referring to, just go to Lakeshore residents. If we were responsible for that, that would be one of those cases we would send both to the taxpayer address and the resident address to ensure any renters were notified as well. And thank you, Patty, for the kind comment. Okay, so if one last question. Okay, looks like Scott has a question. Go ahead. Scott, are you there? Scott, we're not hearing anything. If you are talking, just make sure you're unmuted. And if we can't hear you, maybe you could write it in the chat. Oh, are you there, Scott?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. I was wondering about what you can do about muck as far as naturally, so like an aqua sweep or aeration to reduce the levels of the muck in the middle section where it's like practically near the surface and several feet deep.
That's a good question. I know that there were people in the Middle Basin that had bought, I don't know the trade names, but they were basically muck blowers where they've mounted in their dock and would blow muck away. And Fish and Wildlife has come out that does require a permit, a hydraulic project approval or HPA permit for those. What was the other tool you had mentioned?
Oh, I was just referring to the dock mounted aqua sweep.
Yeah,
And
so
they
those
also make one that you can put out on like a little float thing and it kind of moves around on its own and blows around and aerates as well.
Yeah, so because of that, or any system, so basically anytime you're in the water doing any sort of work, you're going to trigger some sort of permit. So for those, that would be a HPA permit from Fish and Wildlife. To put anything on the bottomlands or aeration, that would also require permits in HPA and likely a DNR land use authorization to put it on the bottom. And we would strongly, one of the issues when blowing muck around is that, and Harry, maybe you want to jump in and talk about the phosphorus impacts for that, or anything else you have on this topic to add?
Yeah, that's a good point. The thing when you displace the muck, the sediment that's flocculent, you're going to be creating water quality problems that both in terms of DO, so the general ecology, but also fertilizing algal growth and promoting excess algae and potential cyanobacteria blooms. The other thing is as you reduce the amount of aquatic plants growing in the mid-basin by a long-term control program, you reduce the amount of muck that's being created by those plants. And the muck that's already there will be decaying over time. So the reduction will take place in the long term on its own because of the compression of that muck and the lack of generation and its decay. So it's not a done in one day, but the more you disturb it and the more you go after it, there are some problems. Now, muck, historically, we have done muck control in drinking water reservoirs. I did it in California and Florida, where we used hydrogen peroxide, but that has now changed because peroxide's now a algicide under the permit process, and you can't use the pellet concentrations to the point that were used historically 30 years ago, like we did. So and just putting aeration in, most aeration units do not oxygenate the sediment itself. And so a long-term aeration isn't there. So then you're back to your physically moving it around or blowing it around, and that's just going to elevate the water quality and other kind of environmental risks.
Harry, has there been any benefit shown from the bottom barriers in muck consolidation?
Over time it does, because it's also, you're producing less organics being deposited right there by the plants. And as the oxygen concentration in the water sediment interface increases because of less stress from the excessive plants and the excessive organics, you see a degradation of the organics and you see a compression. So yeah, and those bottom barriers such as that decay over time and have sand or pellet stones weighting down those barriers, as that rots, that tends to compress the sediment also. So yes, but that's a long-term process, not short-term.
Okay, and I think one other thing that came up in the committee meetings was there was a question about muck digesters. We did discuss those as an option too, but we've found no evidence that those actually work to reduce muck, is my understanding. I don't know if if anybody's interested, we can talk more about that, but we would not recommend those as an efficient use of funds for muck reduction, and they also require permits to apply to the lake. Okay. Shannon, I think that's it on our time for discussion. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So I hear lots of good questions and good thoughts. And what I didn't hear is that there was strong opposition to moving forward as we kind of proposed to take this plan with a final vote with those elements that we showed and to get approval, yes or no, except that we want to see a very distinction there and making sure that people with multiple parcels can vote multiple times. And I didn't hear much objection one way or the other to moving. I guess the next steps for us is to finalize the plan, and that's very clear. And then we will need to work with the community and boat club to finalize and figure out what this funding structure looks like, what those next steps are for that, is what I'm taking away from this discussion, because I didn't necessarily hear a strong opposition to moving forward with that once that plan is finalized. So if anybody else wants to say anything on those two issues, go ahead and raise your hand. I know this is just a small portion of the community compared to the whole amount, but thank you all for coming and weighing in on that. So we have a few minutes if anybody else has anything to add. Otherwise, we're going to turn it over to Brian to kind of conclude the meeting.
I had a comment too.
Oh, you have a comment. Okay, so this is Brian as a citizen commenting.
Yeah. Again, in order for the community to do anything, it's the community that votes on that at the meetings and that. So everything going forward, once there is a plan in place, has to be done then and there with the community there. So I'd encourage most of the community members and that and other community people to show up. Our next meeting, I don't know if everybody's gotten the mail. We've probably sent it out several times and emails and that, but it's November 13th at Camp Edward, Perry Lodge, the next community meeting in that. And yeah, I guess the step now, like you're saying, you want to get this approved and that and move forward on how it's implemented and that. And I think there's kind of going to be some confusion on funding in that, because even if we get everything passed and that, you're still going to be at least a year's away before you can get the whole amount if you're going to get the surcharge. So I don't know how long this is going to hold off. I will talk about the community meeting and that, but and there's, like you said before, there are options in that. Once you have the plan together, like you have a couple options as far as lilies and that. So within that, whoever's running that team and working with you, if that all gets approved, can decide what is best. If they find other things, like if poisoning is really held out, they can do the harvesting, that type of thing, right? So that can be worked out as we go along. So I don't want to get it wrong when we present this, because I'm not sure if the same people show up to community meetings as the people that did a lot of these online surveys and that. Just hearing some people say that the neighbors didn't get the emails or didn't get the notifications and stuff like that. And I guess we'll see what happens. So.
Okay, and so and just to clarify that everybody will be receiving a mailer to do the final vote on the plan. And it looks like it was about 85%, it said, of your membership that was taking the survey originally. To give you an idea. So, but again, I don't know if that means meeting. So we will know by your meeting whether the plan's been approved and what that looks like. So we can share that.
Also, I want to share that if you're encountering someone that wants to get the emails and hasn't had the emails, they can go to the project webpage and sign up to receive emails from us about Lake Roesiger. So if you're talking to your neighbors or your friends that live near on the lake, please help communicate that information to them, because we're trying our very best to communicate to everyone. So we need your help as well. So if they would like to receive emails, forward that email to them or notify them that they can go to the project webpage, give them the webpage, they can sign up there. We also utilize Nextdoor. So if anybody's on Nextdoor, we've been sending it to the entire lake watershed and shoreline. So that's another tool we've been using.
Yeah, Alyssa's been doing the same for the club and that. So kind of giving the community an overload on information and that. So we have sent out emails, and we have also been on Facebook and Nextdoor, and also put it on our webpage. So there's a link to this project, the county project, on our webpage for the club. So, we're kind of pushing it to trying to get it out there as much as possible. It's kind of a rough time of year coming to the end of the year versus the beginning of summer. But all right, I think that's it. Oh, I did have a question. There was somebody, Bill, on there that wanted to get involved with diving and milfoil and that. I did make a comment before to get a hold of Community Relations Committee, which there's a link on our website, or you can also get a hold of Alyssa or something to give us information on that. So we're encouraging that. So we have people who can do that at the beginning of spring, take a look even.
And along with that, if there's anybody that hasn't received an email from the county, you can also put your email message in a chat to Jen Oden, and she will add you to that list too after the meeting. I do have a hand up from Tom Tigan, our Director of Department of Conservation Natural Resources. So go ahead, and Tom, if you'd like to add anything.
All right, I would. First, I want to say thank you so much to the community members and residents that participated in the survey and then are taking the time to be on tonight. And amazing, 99 plus comments on the chat. So this is exactly what we hope for when we talk about public process and really engaging with communities and having communities help really drive decision making. And then clearly I need to thank Marissa and Jen. They're fantastic. They are very competent. They listen well, they interpret well, and they are very available. So very proud that they are part of the county team. And then our consultant team, Harry, Tony, thank you very much, Shannon. It's very important that we work with our consultants closely. So this is a citizen and or a resident and lake owner driven initiative. We are there to support and collect data and provide the best information we possibly can with our consultant teams. But at the end of the day, we're doing it together. And so this is really probably the best opportunity for our residents and government to work together to find a better way to preserve the water quality and recreational capacity and enjoyment of these amazing lakes. So thanks to all of you for your time tonight. It's fantastic.
Thanks, Tom. You stole my thunder a bit because I was just going to say, this plan is really all for you. And so we hope that everyone's satisfied with the process that we've gotten to get to this point. And I know there's not always agreement on every aspect of the plan, but you've just done a tremendous job participating and providing your input so we can make it what works for you and your community. So thank you again and appreciate y'all coming tonight. Oh, and we will be posting a recording of this online and to the website. So anybody that wasn't able to attend can watch it and send questions as well. We will, Jen, if you could put the website link in the chat. It's also where we got the Zoom message. We will be posting that final vote to the website. It'll be an online survey, it'll be much shorter, just a couple questions. And I will be sending that to the board probably in advance as well, just so we can make sure it looks good to you before we send it out. So you can look for that tomorrow. And hope you all can vote and tell all your neighbors to vote and give as much public participation on this as possible. So with that, have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.